And he will tell you he is a renter. He is not buying a home. Buying a home is not a great investment. You may not know this, but homeowners are roughly 35 to 40 times higher net worth than renters do. You hear this all the time. Renting is just throwing away money and buying is a great investment. There's a big debate right now about renting versus owning real estate and what is the better way to go, especially right now with housing affordability being such a challenge. Depending on who you listen to, whether it's Dave Ramsey, Ramit Sethi, Graham Stephan, everyone has an opinion and so do I, and I want to give you a much more balanced answer since there's no 100% correct answer. It always depends on your personal situation and where you are in life. But first, did you know that 90%, yes, 90% of all millionaires became so through owning real estate? More money has been made in real estate than in any and all industrial investments combined, and the wise young person or wage earner of today should invest their money in real estate. So what I'm not saying is that there's never a situation where renting doesn't make sense. Sometimes when you move, you go to a new city, maybe you're only going to be there for a year or two and you're not sure, you got divorced and need a place to stay for 6 months, or you lack the current job security or income you feel you need before buying something, and then buying a home right now might have to be put on hold. But for me, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a real estate agent, but for what I call everyday wealthy people, most of whom you would not even know they're rich, likely one of the two ways that they got wealthy was owning real estate. And not just their primary residence, they kept buying income-producing real estate and they held it for the long term. And I know you can do it because I have. So today we're going to talk about the pros and cons of renting versus buying and how it affects your lifestyle, your stability in the community, your ability to build up your long-term wealth, the tax advantages, and I can go on and on. So are you ready to make the right choice for you, not just for today, but for the long term in the future? Then please stick around for one of the most important episodes we've ever done. Are you considering relocating to Reno or Northern Nevada? Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell for notifications to learn more about why Reno is an excellent place to live and work. Renting versus owning and the pros and cons, and let's start with what we know for sure. You hear this all the time. Renting is just throwing away money and buying is a great investment. And everyone has an opinion on that, but it all depends on where you are in life. There is no one-size-fits-all situation. So let's talk about the pros and cons of renting first, and then I'm going to add on some stuff to this as well. But the pros, of course, are lower upfront costs. Maybe you have a security deposit, maybe first and last month's rent. You normally are not dealing with repairs and maintenance and those kind of things. You just call the landlord and they deal with it. The other good thing is you're flexible, so at the end of a lease, you can more easily move. You have no HOA fees or property taxes, so there's lots of pros to that. So some cons of renting are, of course, your rent can go up with proper notice. The owner could literally sell the house and now you don't have a rental at all because the people want to buy it and move into it, so now you have to move. You're not building up any equity. You have less control over your living spaces. You can't just decorate or do whatever you want. And of course, a lot of times there are pet restrictions, and there's just a few other things that are negatives about renting. So here's some pros if you're buying a house. Hopefully you're building up equity. You have full control over your living space. You can put solar panels up, you can decorate however you want, and you have a set monthly payment, at least for the principal and interest part of your payment. You're not going to have to move unless you choose to move, and so there's also no restrictions on some of the things you can do, whether you want pets or more roommates or whatever it might be. The cons, of course, it is more expensive up front. You have a down payment, you have closing costs, you're likely going to have to get a real estate agent involved, and if you have any repairs or any maintenance to do, you're going to be dealing with that on your own, so there's a little more work to do, and it's not quite as easy to move if you want to get your money out of the house. So let's talk about some financial gurus you hear all over the internet. Of course, Dave Ramsey thinks people should own real estate, which is good, but he also thinks in order to buy, you should have 20% down on a 15-year mortgage, and your payment should be no more than 25% of your income, which to me is very conservative and very difficult to do, especially where I live. Now, he owns a ton of real estate and he wants you to own a ton of real estate as well, but until you can meet the criteria he's looking for, he's not comfortable with you going out and buying real estate because he thinks maybe you're putting the cart before the horse and jumping a little ahead of the game. But I think in today's world, you're going to have to do that. The days of trying to keep your payment at 25% of your overall income is just going to be too difficult to do to get in the game. Another guy I watch videos on all the time is Ramit Sethi. He wrote the book, I'll Teach You to Be Rich. He has a Netflix show talking about all things personal finance and money, and he will tell you he is a renter, and he says he is not buying a home and how buying a home is not a great investment, even though someday he says he'll do it. You may not know this, but homeowners are roughly 35 to 40 times higher net worth than renters do. So long-term, a lot of people, it just makes more sense to own. But I get in the short term, there are some situations where renting does make sense. So Graham Stephan's the third guy I want to talk about, and I don't know if he still is, but at one time he was a real estate agent. Now he's a professional YouTuber. He has over 4 million subscribers. He talks about all this stuff, and he's making tons of money from YouTube, but he has a different perspective. And I watched a video about him. I couldn't even follow half the stuff he was talking about, to be honest with you. And again, they keep talking about right now in the current environment, how renting a house, especially in major metropolitan cities, is cheaper than buying. And I would agree with him. If you're trying to buy in San Francisco or LA or New York, it makes total sense right now that you couldn't afford to buy there. And even in markets like Reno, it is sometimes better for people to rent versus buy. So Ramit is the one that I really want to talk about. He's the one I have the biggest issues with, and here's why. And he basically keeps saying how he is a renter. He's going to rent for the long term. And what I love and what he talks about is where he says, let's say you could rent a place, and he talks about 2 side-by-side apartment units in a building that he lives in. If he could rent this unit for $3,000 a month, but he could buy the one next door, and I think in the example, he said the payment was going to be $6,400 a month. Take that extra $3,400 and invest it every month, and you'll have more money if you did that versus buying over renting. What Ramit doesn't understand is most people can't afford the $3,000, let alone the $6,400. So that strategy is going to work for so little people that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. What really got me all riled up was he talks about this one thing where it's the dream we've been sold. He actually called it full-blown propaganda, where the country's trying to get people to buy a house with a white picket fence and 2.5 kids and a dog, and that home ownership is being sold as this just myth of why it's a benefit to you and that most people shouldn't do it, which I just thought was ridiculous. So number 2 are the myths about owning a home. So the first one was that he said was prices always go up. Now we know prices don't always go up. I sold real estate for 25 years and prices go up and down. But he's always talking about putting your money in the stock market. And guess what? The stock market doesn't always go up every year either. It has its ups and its downs. So the second one is the value of a house doubles every 10 years. I don't know where he got that one. I've been selling real estate again for a long time. I've never heard of people saying every 10 years you can just assume your house is going to double. The third one he argues about is you can use leverage, or that people that want to buy a house, we sell it as you can use leverage to increase your gains. And that is true. He would admit that it's true. But what he's talking about is if I have a $400,000 house and we put 10% down, which will be $40,000. If we use that $40,000 and put in the stock market and it goes up 10%, you make $4,000. But on a house, because you have a $400,000 house you bought, if it goes up 10%, it goes up $40,000. So you are using leverage as that money goes up. His argument is that when prices come down, leverage is being used against you. And that is true. But if a price comes down 10%, it's going to go from 400 down to 360. You can argue it both ways, but I think the leverage is one of the best benefits of owning property is you can own millions of dollars of assets and you don't actually need millions of dollars. And the fourth thing we're talking about is he says, of course, we sell it as you can deduct your mortgage interest from your taxes. And yes, it is true. The benefit is relatively minor on that benefit of your taxes. But again, people are not calling me saying, ooh, I want to buy this house because I'm going to get this great tax benefit. They're buying a house because they want to own something and live in something that they have more control over, more space, a yard, and all those kind of things. So my number 3 issue with him is he talks about always running the numbers. And he looks at what you pay for rent versus what your house payment's going to be. And then he wants to add in all the things that you also need to add on in the homeownership side and comparing and running your numbers. And when I tell people there are definitely markets where if you just say, hey, I can rent this house for $3,000, and if I buy it, it's going to cost me $5,000. And then there's all these hidden costs, of course, with repairs and maintenance and other things, is why he says homeownership is not a good idea. I don't want anyone to buy a house that can't afford the house either. And we definitely want to run their numbers and find out what their comfort level is on that monthly payment. You're going to have some additional expenses, and that's part of home ownership. And of course, ideally, you're going to start building up equity. Your house price is going to go up over time. And no, you should never buy a home knowing that I'm going to sell in a year or two or thinking the house is going to go up $100,000 in a year. There's been a few fluky situations where that happens, but real estate is meant to be played for the long term. And when I think they're trying to compare numbers of renting versus buying, they're always comparing it for the short term and not the long term. So the last issue is, he says, is buying a house ever a good idea? And it's a terrible financial decision. And even though I said at the beginning, 90% of all millionaires do so through owning real estate, I can't figure out why anyone would ever tell people that owning real estate is a terrible financial decision when most people through owning real estate in the stock market is how they got wealthy. Are you planning to relocate to Reno, Nevada? Make sure you're fully informed by clicking in the video description to download our free buyer's guide. This guide is packed with all the information you're going to need to get started on your real estate journey into Northern Nevada. So my favorite thing that they all mention is opportunity costs of your down payment, meaning, again, let's use that $400,000 house example with the $40,000 down payment. And they're saying if you took that $40,000 and put it in the stock market, you'd be earning interest or earning increasements in your investments. And you know what? There's not been an opportunity where the stock market goes up every year. There's not been times where the housing market goes up every year. It's this up and down, up and down, up and down cycles that we have. And of course, we got real lucky because we did have a really long cycle, say from 2011, 12 to just a few years ago. But again, you're going to see these things bounce up and down on both. And I'm a big proponent of you should be doing both. So hopefully if you're a young person or someone maybe getting into this game, you should own a house. You should be investing in the stock market. You should be investing in your retirement account. So there's no do one or the other. You should be doing both. So as you're doing both of these things, here are 5 questions that we want to ask somebody before they buy a house. And one is, how long do you intend to live in the house? Ideally, you're going to live there at least 7 to 10 years or longer. Number 2 would be, will my monthly housing costs be less than 20% of my gross income? I don't know if I agree with that one, but that was one they're being, again, ultra conservative if you look at it that way. You can make that number be higher if you didn't have all these consumer debts. So when people talk about their house payment, a lot of times where they can't afford their house payment is because they got car payments and student loans and credit card payments and other debt that you shouldn't really have. The third one is, have I saved 20% for a down payment? And they were saying you don't necessarily have to put 20% down for a down payment, but if you're able to save up that much, then you've shown yourself being a person that can save some money, build up a nest egg, and whether you buy a home and decide to put 5 or 10% down, or you decide to put 20 or more percent down, it's a good thing, but it just shows you have the ability to save up some money for a down payment as you're going forward. Question number 4 is, what happens, and this did happen for a lot of people in the last couple of years, is, are you okay if the value of your house goes down? Now, if you were a person that just bought a home, say 18, 24 months ago, it is possible that in the short term, your house value might be less. No difference. And I had lots of people asking me back in 07 and 08, 09 when the house prices has plummeted, what do I do? My house value is now way lower. Well, many of those people, I told them, if you just keep making the payment every month, guess what? Over the long haul, the values will come back. And every single person that did that was able to keep making their payments, stay in their homes, not only did their prices come back, it beat the peak values of 05 and 06. And by the time we get 20, 21, 22, their homes were hundreds of thousands of dollars, even more than that. You should not be worried in the short term, what if your house value goes down? And the last question, number 5, was, are you excited to buy a home? Do you want to buy a home? Do you want to get into the homeownership game? And if you are, you should be excited about that. And let me tell you, for those of you that are currently in a rental situation, you're not a failure. I don't agree that there's never a good time to rent. You just don't want to be a long-term renter. You want to think about how owning a home affects your lifestyle, your stability in the community, your ability to build up your long-term wealth. And yeah, there's some minor tax advantages, but that's really not what we're doing here. We're trying to figure out what all the positive, emotional things that happen when you own a home, especially if you pay extra and you own your home free and clear. So if you're a renter, just know the rents are not exactly coming down. Rents keep going up. My team personally does property management, and it is very rare that the rent goes down. Occasionally, an owner asks for way too much, and you think the rent might have been less than what the person before was paying, but typically that is not the case. The owner could also decide they don't want to extend your lease, and now you get forced to move, or they could just sell the property and a new buyer wants to move into it and live in there. The big con about renting is you could be forced to move even if you don't want to. Even if you have to happen to make a lot of money through a business, you have a very high salary, and you want to be a long-term renter, I get it. But to me, you need to invest in the stock market. You need to invest in real estate. And if you personally want to be a renter, you should go out and buy homes that can also be used to build up cash flow and equity, and it's just a good investment for most people. So one of the bigger reasons to me why a lot of people end up being forced to rent is they have too much consumer debt. So a lot of these guys we're talking about, and you hear some numbers all the time saying that your house payment shouldn't be more than 20% of your gross income. Ramit talks about a lower number. Dave Ramsey talks about a lower number. Since you have a bunch of other payments, such as car payments, student loans, that's part of the problem is you could have a higher number and you can, figure out how to make your payments on a house that's a little more expensive than what they're suggesting. Even if you were to go get a mortgage and it was a lot higher than that 28% number they're using, you can always pay extra. You can always get the house paid off sooner. Even if you owned it free and clear, you're still going to have things like property taxes, insurance, and some maintenance and repairs, and maybe some HOA fees. But I bet you'd be in a great financial position if you had no actual house payment every single month. So in my opinion, the answer is this. Everyone's in a different situation, so you need to reach out to me and we can discuss what you're trying to do, what questions you might have, so that you know whether in the short-term or long-term renting makes sense, whether owning makes sense. And it is a terrific investment. You just have to play the long game with it and just understand. If you're not sure what to do, reach out to a professional and know we can sit down and have a conversation, and there's no pressure to buy something today. You might not be ready for it right now. The plan is to play the long game, figure out what to do now so that renting long-term is not your wealth building solution. Owning real estate is. Are you curious to know what it's like to live in Northern Nevada and what this great city and area are all about? Then don't miss our next video where we talk about all the things cost of living and not just about rents and buying. So check it out and take a look.